Welcome again to the CSO Sandbox Strategy Brief. Today, I want to start with a company that wasn't supposed to end up where it is. Nearly 30 years ago, Netflix was a DVD rental business. Customers selected films online. DVDs arrived through the post. No streaming, no original content, no billion-dollar productions, and no global platform influencing how hundreds of millions of people consume entertainment. Just DVDs. And yet somehow along the way, Netflix repeatedly found itself standing where everybody else wasn't. It saw possibilities that others ignored. It questioned assumptions that others treated as obvious. It moved from DVD rental to streaming, from distributor to creator, from content delivery to content platform. Looking back, it appears inevitable. But that's only because we already know the ending. At the time, none of those decisions looked inevitable at all. They looked uncertain, risky, possibly reckless. The future wasn't known, but then the future never is. All Netflix really had were observations, questions, signals, a growing sense that something was changing. And that's what makes a recent story so fascinating. According to reporting in the Wall Street Journal, one metric has become a frequent topic of discussion inside Netflix. On the surface, the topic was subscriptions falling away. Underneath, it was all about engagement. Not subscriptions, not revenue, not profitability, but engagement. At the same time, Netflix is reportedly exploring ideas such as live television and bundled offerings as it searches for new ways to maintain audience engagement in an increasingly competitive environment. Now that should make us pause, because engagement isn't a strategy, it's a signal. It tells leaders that something may be changing, but it doesn't tell them what that change means. It doesn't tell them whether customer behaviour is shifting temporarily or permanently. It doesn't tell them whether what they're observing is a threat, an opportunity, or perhaps both at the same time. And it certainly doesn't tell them what decision should come next. That's where the story becomes interesting. Because once the signal starts flashing, strategic thinking naturally begins exploring possibilities. New products, new services, new partnerships, new business models and new sources of growth. Some people would say that's exactly what leadership should do. Others would argue it risks chasing solutions before the underlying issue is fully understood. The reality, as always, is more complicated than either position. But for me, the most interesting question isn't whether Netflix's response succeeds. The most interesting question is what happened before those options appeared. Examples? What did Netflix start noticing? What assumptions became less reliable? What conversations started happening inside the organisation? Because the challenge wasn't a lack of information. If anything, Netflix appears to have had the opposite problem. The signal was visible. The challenge was understanding what the signal meant. Subscriptions or engagement. And that's where this story becomes much bigger than Netflix. For years, we've celebrated leaders like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk, and many more, as people who somehow saw the future before everyone else. I'm not sure that's what happened though. In fact, I think that explanation lets the rest of us off the hook too easily. Perhaps what made these leaders remarkable wasn't prediction. Perhaps it was observation. Perhaps they noticed things that others dismissed. Perhaps they remained curious longer than everyone else. Perhaps they were willing to sit with uncertainty while others demanded certainty. Because strategy rarely begins with certainty. It usually begins with discomfort, a question that won't go away, an assumption that feels less reliable than it once did, a pattern that's beginning to emerge, a signal that somebody notices, and then a choice. Do we ignore it, or do we pay attention? Which brings us to one of the most common questions in strategy. Not before disruption, after it. Not before the market changes, after it. Not before customer behaviour shifts, after it. The question is familiar. Why didn't we see this coming? It's one of the most important questions in strategy, because the answer is almost never, nobody knew. Usually, somebody knew something. A customer noticed. A salesperson noticed. Operations noticed. A manager noticed. Frontline employee? The organisation wasn't blind. The signals existed. And yet, everyone still feels surprised. I've conducted and analysed enough strategic reviews and associated board discussions to recognise the pattern. The board wants answers. The executive team wants explanations. In worst case scenario, they want heads. The timeline is reconstructed, reports are reviewed, assumptions are revisited, and eventually someone says, actually, we'd been hearing something about this for months. That's always the moment that interests me the most, because it reveals that the real problem, the organisation saw something. It simply never figured out what it was seeing. Or perhaps more accurately, it never developed a shared understanding of what that signal might mean. Many organisations assume they have an information problem, so they buy more information, more dashboards, more reports, more analytics, more forecasting, more predictive models. And all of these things can be valuable. But information does not automatically create understanding. In fact, many organisations now possess more information than at any point in history. Yet strategic surprises continue to happen. Why? Because there is a profound difference between knowing something is changing and understanding the implications of that change. Netflix provides a useful illustration. Data can tell leaders that engagement is changing. Analytics can estimate the probable consequences. Predictive models can project likely outcomes. But none of those can answer the questions that matter most. Should we invest differently? Should we challenge our assumptions? Should we experiment? Should we commit? Should we wait? Those are not analytical questions. They are strategic questions. And somewhere between observation and commitment sits a capability that many organisations have never deliberately developed. I call it strategic intelligence. Not forecasting, not prediction, not knowing the future, because the future cannot be known. Strategic intelligence is something much simpler. It is the organisational capability to notice, interpret, and explore what may matter before commitment becomes necessary. It's the bridge between something is happening and this is what it might mean. But understanding alone isn't enough. Every organisation eventually reaches a point where understanding must become judgment. Signals must be interpreted. Possibilities must be evaluated. Alternatives must be judged, and commitments must be made. Which raises the next question. If strategic intelligence helps us understand what may be happening, how do we decide what deserves commitment? That's where strategic judgment begins. And perhaps that's what made organisations like Netflix successful in the first place. Not because they predicted the future, but because they repeatedly demonstrated an ability to recognise change, challenge assumptions, and explore possibilities before others did. Not once, repeatedly. In hindsight, we call that innovation. At the time, it probably felt like uncertainty. And that's an important distinction. Success doesn't eliminate uncertainty. In many cases, success creates new assumptions. And sometimes the hardest signals to recognise are the ones that challenge the assumptions that made us successful in the first place. That's true for Netflix, it's true for industries, it's true for institutions, and it's true for all of us. The future rarely arrives as a fully formed strategic issue. It arrives as fragments, a customer commitment, a market shift, a competitor move, a technological change, a strange pattern, a recurring question. An assumption that suddenly feels less reliable. On their own, these things appear insignificant. Together, they may be signalling something much bigger, which is why the challenge isn't collecting more signals. The challenge is creating conditions where those signals can be connected, explored, and understood. So perhaps the question isn't, why didn't we see this coming? Perhaps the better question is, how do we become better at understanding what we're already seeing? Because organisations rarely fail because they lacked information. More often, they fail because they struggle to transform information into understanding. And understanding rarely emerges from information alone. It emerges through the conversations organisers have about what that information might mean. Without those conversations, organisations struggle to decide which signals matter the most, which assumptions deserved challenge, which possibilities deserved exploration, and which changes might ultimately reshape their future. The organisations that thrive won't necessarily be the organisations that predict the future most accurately. They'll be the organisation that notice sooner, learn faster, interpret more effectively, and develop a deeper understanding of what their signals are trying to tell them. That's where strategic intelligence begins. And in the next episode, we'll examine the question that comes after understanding, because recognising change is one thing, deciding what to do about it is something else entirely. Thanks for listening. My name is Paul Hunter. I look forward to joining you again in our next podcast.